Here on Superior National Forest with Tom from the Voyageur Wolf Project, and this is a deer rib cage in front of us.
Yes, a unique piece for your audience there. So
with some blood on it and
the tissue. Yep.
So this is a fresh wolf kill, and the boundary waters are about 10 miles back behind us here, and we are here because of the Voyageur Wolf Project and the data that you had that brought us here.
Sure.
Essentially was able to pinpoint an estimated area where a kill had occurred recently.
Yep.
What's your emotional response at this point, Tom, when you come upon a kill site? As we were saying when we got here, if odor could transmit to video and audio, that is a very powerful part of this for me, certainly. But you've seen many of these kills, so what's your emotional response seeing this?
You know, I don't think there's much of an emotional response at this point. I think obviously there's a certain amount of obviously unpleasantness that happens at scenes like this where an animal is getting eaten alive, and that is to sustain other animals so they can keep living. And it's obviously a challenge when you are studying predation as a whole, is to think about sort of what you make of predation and its role in the natural world. So it's not to say it's something I've thought about a lot when I come to individual scenes like this. Now it's just sort of acceptance of that's the way the world works. And I don't know why it's meant to work that way, but that's how it works. So more for me, it's getting the data, the information, trying to learn as much as possible from these scenes and understand why this particular animal might have been killed, why it was killed, where it was right here. How were they successful in this instance? So that's where my mind typically goes, is how do I get the most information I possibly can from whatever is left at this site.
Okay, so this rib cage and this tissue that we're looking at here is maybe 20 yards or 30 yards from the actual kill site, which is just right over here. And that's where that odor is from the stomach fragments and so forth. And there's a leg and some other parts of the body down just from there as well that we found. You said that maybe it was eaten alive. Is that what would happen if a pack of wolves takes down a deer, that they would start to consume it like before it would be killed?
Certainly, I mean, wolves they're not interested about euthanizing the deer before they start eating. For them, it's about, can they get that animal basically incapacitated, unable to move, and then they're going to start eating. So it's not unreasonable to think a lot of times they probably start eating that deer before it's fully dead. Obviously, it's not going to live very long after they start consuming it. But you do see, lots of blood at these sites and things like that, because they start eating a deer, eating its internal organs first, and then they then from there, once they eat the internal organs, go to the muscle and things like that. So once they get that deer down on the ground, they're going to start ripping into that internal cavity and start going after it. And so sometimes the deer, maybe it's dead, and then sometimes maybe not.
Yeah, there was some blood-soaked pine cone over there, blood splattered on some branches, and some movement where it looked like the kill had happened almost in two different sites very close by. So a pretty big struggle. A struggle occurred.
Certainly if we were here 3 days ago, we would be observing a very violent encounter, of a deer trying to fight for its life and a pack of wolves taking it down because they need that food to keep their lives going. So it certainly is would have been something if you could sit here and observe these sort of things, which are often very challenging to see in Minnesota.
Right. So 3 days you referenced that this deer has likely been there approximately. What's the freshest or most recent kill that you've been to based on evidence and blood and so forth?
So there's been a couple I've been to 2 hours after they occurred. These are ones in the winter time where wolves have taken out a deer on the ice or something like that, and we know when it occurred and we get out there right away. And so they actually haven't fully consumed the carcass. And those are very fresh in the winter, that, because we saw a wolf on the carcass and then we go out there. In terms of following GPS collared wolves, probably the freshest has been a couple hours. When when we were trying to do some of our work, especially when we were first getting started, we were trying to get to kills as quickly as we possibly could so we could see what was left. Because when we started studying wolf predation behavior during the summer, and I should say the biological summer for wolves, which goes from spring to fall, we weren't sure what was going to be left of deer that they killed or other prey species. So our goal was to get there as soon as possible so that stuff couldn't disappear, right? And so we could get an idea of how long was the evidence there at those sites. So then we could try to figure out how to study it most effectively. So we visited quite a few that are very fresh. This is probably typical, 3-4 days, something like that. And obviously, as you can see here, if it doesn't rain, there's still plenty left, right? Lots of blood, the stomach contents, rib cage, hair. So enough evidence that even if we came, in 2-3 more days, there's still going to be plenty there to let us know a predation event occurred.
Right, and also some more to eat potentially. They'll be back here?
I almost certainly, yeah.
Okay.
I bet if we put a remote camera on this, or we obviously found a couple of those leg bones down in the woods, that wolves will circle back here and consume these. Now, it might not be in the next couple days, it could be a week, could be 2 weeks, but they know where their kills are, they know what's left, and it is not uncommon for them to circle back to spots where there's food, especially if they go through a period where maybe they're struggling to get fresh kills or kill deer in other spots, and they start getting hungry, they might come back. There's still plenty of tissue and bone fragments, and they'll just grind up all of that. And same with the legs there. Those long bones have marrow in them. That's fatty, good, nutritious contents for them, and they're going to come back and they'll crunch those up and consume them as well.
Okay. So we paddled a canoe out here today, which is fantastic. We paddled and portaged to get to this site where we are for our immediate company, which focuses on those very things. That was a unique aspect to get out here today. And we started in a lowland bog off of a lake that we paddled, and you had found some very fresh scat out there, and the contents of that scat told you a story. What did that tell you, Tom, when you saw that? Yeah,
so the scat we found in that bog was very fresh, and it had, in particular, there wasn't a ton of hair in it, but there was it was very dark, and it looked like there was a lot of essentially fecal material in it. And given the color of that scat, the fact that there wasn't a ton of hair, all of that indicated that it was a scat that was a result of the wolf feeding on a relatively fresh kill. And so when we found that, it let me know that somewhere around here was a fresh kill that wolf consumed, because when wolves, like we were just talking about how they eat carcasses, they start with the internal organs when they first make a kill. When those get digested and pass through the system, they come out in more of a liquid black tar form. So that's, if you find a scat like that, those wolves had just eaten something. But then as they start going from eating the internal organs to eating a lot of the muscle on the animal, that gives these scats that are going to be dark, a bit more firm. They're not going to have a ton of hair and bones in them yet, though, because they're eating still just a lot of meat. And that's basically what we found in that bog. So the composition of a scat can tell you a little bit about when that wolf had a meal. And so that's what I was using to kind of determine, there's something around here somewhere, we just have to find it.
So then from there, you took that evidence that you saw and started to piece together, almost in like a detective working a crime scene of, okay, now I'm going to walk up this hillside. You said, let's go into the forest up here into this pine and balsam forest, spruce, and look for some other points that might be where the kill actually occurred. But you were surprised that it was up here in this specific spot. It took you aback. It was my observation. And why was that?
Yeah, so it's not typical to find kills of deer in forests like this. Typically, these kinds of forests, which are these, higher elevation for Minnesota, forests are where wolves come to bed down, rest, sleep. They like to sleep in these nice pine-covered, mossy areas. They don't often kill deer in these spots. Usually they kill deer in lower environments, typically where there's a transition from one habitat to another. So like if we were at the base of this ridge where it met a different kind of forest, that's where I'd expect the kill to be, or on the edge of a bog on the lake. Not up here. There's just something about these forests, for whatever reason, they're not places wolves are able to take deer down successfully. They probably chase them across these habitats, but they just can't get them in these very often. Obviously, this is an exception, and we have seen others from time to time, but I would bet if you look at all the deer that have been killed by wolves that we've documented, maybe 2% of them occur in habitats like this or less. So it's just not typical, so which is why we started in the bog and then made our way up here, eventually finding it.
Okay. And next you'll be collecting some samples and taking some of that then to a lab or somewhere where you'll process some of that material from the deer?
Yep, so we'll collect a genetic sample. That's just going to be archived. We don't do anything with that initially, but we collect it because someday we might have a question we want those samples for. We will go find the deer leg that's over there. We will crack the bone open, extract the marrow. We can then take that back to our lab that we have here, dehydrate the marrow, and basically when you dehydrate the marrow, you're basically dehydrating, you're getting rid of all the water, and all that's left is the fat. And that tells you what the fat content was in that marrow, which tells you a little bit about that deer's physical condition, whether or not it had good fat reserves, bad fat reserves, things like that. We obviously searched around this area intensively trying to find the skull. We didn't find that, but if we could find the skull, we would collect that so we could pull a tooth, and from that tooth you can grind it down and actually count what are called the cementum annuli, which are basically growth rings in the teeth, and we could get an age estimate for that deer. And if we found the skull, we would be able to determine what sex this deer was. Was it a male or a female? As of right now, we don't know that, but that's not atypical for a lot of kills.
Okay, so you talked about the fact that this deer has been ripped apart, scattered, there's legs here or there. The head we did not find, and that would be carried away. People who follow Paddle and Portage know that we've reported fairly extensively, and I've written about a case where a human was likely, or it's been verified, eaten by wolves up the Sioux Hustler Trail, a young guy from New Mexico named Jordan Grider, and the sort of consensus or belief and understanding is that the skull was carried away, and 13 bones were found. For people who are seeing this rib cage and we're describing these violent encounters between this deer that we're looking at and the wolves, that they might be afraid of this. Like, aren't you guys scared that these wolves are around? That type of sentiment. Is there a real reason that people might be afraid of wolves if they're walking around in a forest like this?
I think that there's a natural response to feel afraid if it's something you're unfamiliar with in particular, because obviously wolves, if they wanted to, could kill people readily. Fortunately, that's just not something they do. So I have absolutely no concerns, fear, doing our work in this habitat. I also spend a lot of time recreating. Wolves are just not something I think about it as being concerned. Obviously, for our work, we go to all the spots that wolves have been, and I've never had an instance where I've ever been even remotely concerned for my safety. Similarly, on our project, we've got 7 or 8 people out in the field every day by themselves, going to all the spots wolves have been, and no one has ever even had one remote encounter that it's been like, oh gosh, that was kind of concerning. So I can understand why people feel that way. It reminds me a lot of Sigurd Olsson's got a great chapter in The Singing Wilderness about encountering wolves in the winter, and even though he knew he was out at night snowshoeing, and even though he knew statistically wolves were not a threat, he couldn't help but feel this sort of primordial fear, right? That like they could kill him if they wanted to, right? And that's a strong feeling, right? I do think the more you spend time in wolf country and you're out and around where wolves are, you do realize, yeah, they're really not an issue, right? They're not going to be a concern for you or impacting you or coming after you. But I can understand why, nonetheless, that fear persists. In the same way some people are terrified of bears, even though statistically bears aren't going to really hurt you, they could, right? But it's very, very small. And in fact, you probably are in much more danger, I would imagine, statistically, of getting attacked by a bear than wolves. But even with bears, you don't hear most people like, I'm really afraid to go out there because there's bears.
Right, right. Okay. And this case that I'm talking about with Jordan Grider, it's believed that he died first and then was consumed by wolves, not that they surrounded him and jumped on him, that he died first, then was eaten.
Yes.
So they would eat. Wolves will eat humans. And I was just speaking with a researcher from Michigan, where that's your home state, Tom, and he lives in the UP near Marquette, and does search recovery of humans who go missing. In fact, he's been in Superior National Forest this fall looking for someone who's missing. And he told me that he's found, and he uses wolf scat to try to find traces of where the person may have been consumed or went missing. And he's found seams of clothing in scat and underwear band one time part of. Have you and your team ever found any evidence of human in any of the scat that you've come across?
Yeah, so actually in 2017, was our third year on our project, I was searching clusters of locations like this, and walked in and looked down, and there was a human rib cage in a t-shirt. Which really freaked me out, and I was out in the middle of nowhere. And then as I looked up, there's human clothes and then human remains scattered all over. And then I looked, and there's a little structure that had collapsed that someone had built, and I was freaked out. So I quickly got out of there and went and called the authorities. And anyways, what had happened is someone had, I guess, moved out to remote part of public land, built a little structure, and was a missing person in another county. No one knew what had happened to that person, and I think it's believed he killed himself in that little structure. And then as time went on, that carcass started to smell, and bears and other animals, to them that's just meat, that's just food, and so they got into that structure and started consuming it. So we were continuing to study the wolf that had consumed part of this person, and as we were doing it, we were finding scats like we're seeing here. And in those scats, one of them had a wadded up chunk of a t-shirt in it. Another was almost certainly human hair in it, which was quite strange to see in a scat. So, but from a wolf's perspective, it's just food. They don't think, oh, I shouldn't eat people. They just say it's a meal.
Yeah. Okay. And so, where was that in Minnesota that happened?
Yep, that was just probably 20 miles from here, maybe.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So you, as we're talking about this deer and what wolves eat and humans and so forth, if they've found someone who probably would be dead, but also you and your team over the years with the Voyageurs Wolf Project have talked about beavers, and you're worldwide renowned for that research.
Sure.
About predation on beavers, also fish and berries. So we'll have a lot of information and links to Voyager Wolf Project for people to learn more if they don't already know about the work that you're doing. But the 2025 data was just recently released in October of 25, and a percentage down, about 20% down, maybe 100 wolves believed to be in this area, your research area, but that wasn't alarming to you. It seemed like that's just a natural ebb and flow based on the recent winters in particular, it sounds like.
Yep. Yeah, and so obviously people hear population declines and they think, it's a status of the wolf population. It's just, some will say it's declining, indefinitely, and it's like, no, it's just an annual fluctuation. Wolves adjust to the amount of prey that's on the landscape, and deer populations are a fair bit lower than they were several years ago, and so wolf populations are sort of responding to that decrease, and their populations have declined as a result. And then as time goes on, if deer populations start to come up, it's not going to surprise us at all if we start to see wolf populations come up. So while we observed a 20% decline, and that's obviously catches people's eyes and ears when you hear that online, we've also reported in past years of 20% increases. But that just doesn't catch the news in the same way. But we see those kinds of fluctuations typically. So for us as biologists, it doesn't necessarily concern us or seem abnormal or concerning or alarming or anything like that. We still have plenty of wolves in the area, and I think that's the other thing. Right? Even though we've observed a decline, we still have a moderate to high density wolf population. So when we shared that news publicly, some folks kind of interpreted it as though it's like the population is like just on the verge of just going away, right? And it's like, that's not it. It's just they decreased a little bit because there's not enough food, and now they're at a level that's consistent with the food that's available, right? And that's all that's happening.
Right. Yeah. Maybe they read the Star Tribune headline, and
yes, it gets people to read it. So
right. Okay. Well, we'll add a link to the study as well.
Sure.
If people want to read that, I would encourage them to do that. A lot of information there, and presented in a very easy to interpret way too.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll add that. And I want to give a shout out to a friend of Paddle Portage, Buck Benson, who is largely the reason that we're here today, quite frankly. And Buck, who's a Cook County resident, came and got involved with you and the team in a volunteer way, some citizen science, and did something similar to what we did today, which is get out in the woods with researchers, you and your crew. And Buck got us involved in some webinars that took place last winter, and really appreciate that, and kind of made this connection possible. And there are opportunities for people to get involved with the volunteer opportunities with the Voyager Wolf Project, and also financial contributions? Tell us a little bit about how people can get involved and or help.
Sure. So so what Buck came on was what we're calling field expeditions. These are essentially like experiences where people can come join us in the field, see how we do the work like you guys are, visit areas wolves have killed prey, check out how we set trail cameras, where wolves rear their pups, where wolf dens are, things like that. So we do those. It's something we've done more often. We have a lot of folks who want to get in the woods. They want to see and experience what we're experiencing here. And so we've made these opportunities where this past year we had 5 of these field expeditions where people could join. And in the future, we're going to have more of them. So certainly if people want to join us in the field and see what we're doing, those are great opportunities to do that. And we tried our best in basically a weekend to try to show people what we do, which is obviously challenging, but it's usually been a pretty positive and fun experience. And then otherwise, in terms of volunteer opportunities, we don't have a way to have folks come. We have a lot of folks who also want to come help us in the field, and we're unfortunately not able to just do the logistics and the complications of getting to remote places like this, able to have volunteers come help us, even though we wish we could take advantage of that. The best way, though, folks want to help the project, the best way folks can do that is basically by donating to the project. Our project doesn't have an annual budget through like the University of Minnesota or the DNR or anything like that. We're funded by grants and donations. And so we really need people's support to keep the project going year after year. And so if people can want to help and want to provide a donation, that goes a long way to sort of making sure we have the resources available to continue studying wolves at this sort of high level and keep learning all the things we're learning year after year. And fortunately, we've had a lot of folks who've been willing to do that so far.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to make a financial contribution to this research that's happening here in Minnesota. It's non-political, it's objective, it's science-driven, but you're not trying to, best of my knowledge, sway any sort of political direction for management of wolves. If that's accurate.
That's accurate. Yep. We're not interested. We don't advocate for any particular management strategy. Our goal is to try to understand what wolves do and why they do it, and then anyone who wants to use that information for whatever their values-based positions are, they're welcome to do that. But we're told we have a position because sometimes, unfortunately, the information we find doesn't jive with certain perspectives. But ultimately, our goal is not to convince anybody to think differently about wolf management or anything like that. It's simply just to try to understand the natural world to the best of our abilities.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for bringing us out here today and showing us a hands-on experience, literally, in paddling and portaging to get out here, Superior National Forest, and coming to this kill site, which had an impact on me, quite frankly. I mean, definitely when we came up to the site and that smell hit me, it was just very real. I mean, This is like, whoa, this is how this goes down out here, as opposed to just my imagination of how these things occur. And so I really appreciate your willingness to meet with us. I know you're a very busy guy, and now it's starting to rain out here. So thanks a lot, Tom from Voyageur Wolf Project, for agreeing to meet up with us and take us out here in the field. It means a lot.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Glad to have you guys.